What if the person you least expected, someone living a life of struggle and hard work, was the one who could teach you the most about resilience, justice, and the true meaning of success? Hannah Mitchell was 28, but her eyes carried the weight of a lifetime forged in struggle. Atlanta, Georgia was her home, a city of gleaming skyscrapers and hidden hardships, where the humid air clung to the skin like a second shadow. The Peach Blossom Diner, a 1960s relic with cracked vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent lights, and the constant hum of a coffee machine fighting to stay alive, was her battlefield. She worked grueling double shifts, 14 to 16 hours, her sneakers worn thin from pacing the linoleum, balancing trays of coffee, burgers, and forced smiles to customers who rarely saw her as more than a blur. Her hourly wage was a meager $2.15, a cruel irony in a city where rent climbed faster than her tips. Those tips were her lifeline, though they were as unpredictable as the summer storms that swept through, leaving her counting crumpled bills under the dim light of her apartment, praying they'd cover rent, utilities, and the college fund she was building for her younger brother, Caleb. Hannah's childhood in a low-income Atlanta neighborhood had been a masterclass in survival. Her parents, hard-working but worn down by life, died in a car accident when she was 18, leaving her to raise 12-year-old Caleb. She dropped out of high school to work, earning her GED in stolen moments between shifts. She learned early to read people's faces, to navigate the world's sharp edges with a smile, to keep going when hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Foster care was never an option. She fought tooth and nail to keep Caleb with her, promising him a future where he wouldn't have to scrape by. Her dreams were bigger than the diner, though. Since she was a teenager, she'd been drawn to law. Not the glossy version on TV, but the real thing, the kind that could protect people like her and Caleb from a world that didn't care. She'd spend nights in the public library, poring over legal texts, teaching herself the intricacies of contracts, torts, and criminal procedure. Her mind was sharp, her reasoning razor-like, honed by years of self-study and a natural gift for untangling complex ideas. She'd saved $1,200 toward law school, kept in a locked tin box under her bed, a fragile nest egg she guarded like a treasure. But life was a relentless thief. Caleb's chronic migraines required expensive medication. Their car broke down every other month, and a burst pipe in their apartment had cost her half her savings. Every step toward her dream was met with a stumble backward, yet she held on, whispering to Caleb as she tucked him into bed, "We're gonna make it, kid. You'll get to college, and I'll find my way. Promise." Her voice was steady, but inside, she fought a constant battle against despair, the fear that her dreams would remain just out of reach. Their apartment was a testament to their struggle. The walls were thin, the faucet dripped like a metronome, and the air conditioner rattled like it was on its last breath. But Caleb's textbooks were stacked neatly on a second-hand desk, and Hannah's legal notes covered the kitchen table. Handwritten pages filled with case law, statutes, and definitions, her handwriting precise despite her exhaustion. She'd read to Caleb from her books sometimes, turning dry legal terms into stories of justice, her voice warm and steady. Her sketches of courtrooms, drawn on napkins during diner breaks, were pinned to the fridge beside Caleb's drawings of spaceships and superheroes. Each one was a quiet rebellion, a reminder that she was more than her circumstances. On rare evenings off, they walked to a nearby park, sharing a bag of chips, Caleb teasing her about her lawyer talk. "You're going to be like Perry Mason, Hannah," he'd say, grinning. She'd laugh, ruffling his hair, but inside, the dream felt like a distant star, beautiful, but impossibly far. Hannah's days were a blur of exhaustion, but Caleb kept her grounded. At 17, he was a lanky kid with her father's eyes and a quick wit, his dreams of becoming an engineer fueling her resolve. He'd spend hours tinkering with old electronics, building makeshift circuits that lit up their tiny living room. Hannah saw herself in his determination, his refusal to let their circumstances define him. But the diner was a grindstone, wearing her down. The manager, Mr. Grayson, was a petty tyrant, his sharp tongue and greed a constant threat. He berated her for small mistakes, a spilled coffee, a late order, while pocketing tips when he thought no one noticed. She'd learned to keep her head down, to swallow her anger, but it simmered, a fire waiting for a spark. Judge Edward Thomas didn't belong in places like the Peach Blossom Diner. At 50, he was a towering figure in Atlanta's legal world, known for his sharp tongue, unyielding standards, and a courtroom demeanor that could silence a room with a single glance. His days were spent presiding over cases in the Fulton County Courthouse. His black robe, a symbol of authority earned through decades of hard work. But every Friday, he'd slip into the diner, trading his robe for a quiet booth and a cup of coffee with extra cream. It was his ritual, a momentary escape from the weight of his gavel, where he could pretend to be just another man in a city that never slowed down. The diner was a stark contrast to his polished world. Its grease-stained menus, chipped mugs, and the faint hum of a country song from a radio behind the counter were a time capsule of simpler days. Edward savored the anonymity, the way of the regulars, a mix of truckers, retirees, and night shift workers, didn't bow to his title, but his privilege was never far away. His tailored suits, even without the robe, marked him as an outsider, and his watch, a gift from a grateful client, gleamed under the diner's dim lights. He'd grown up in a middle-class suburb of Atlanta, his path to law school smoothed by supportive parents and scholarships. He'd never known hunger, never had to fight for scraps, but he carried his own burdens, decades of high-stakes cases, a divorce that left him estranged from his 16-year-old son, Ryan, and a growing sense that justice wasn't as clear-cut as he'd once believed. His courtroom was a stage, but lately, he felt like an actor playing a role, his ideals worn thin by years of bureaucracy and compromise. Edward's past wasn't without struggle. He'd worked his way through law school, clerking for judges who saw his potential but demanded perfection. He'd built a reputation as a fair but formidable judge, known for cutting through legal fluff to get to the truth. But success had come, at a cost. His marriage had crumbled under the weight of long hours, and Ryan, now living with his mother in Savannah, blamed him for choosing work over family. Edward's visits to the diner were a way to reconnect with something real, something unpolished, but he couldn't shake the cynicism that had crept into his bones. He saw the world in terms of winners and losers, and people like Hannah, waitresses, service workers, were to him background players, not worth a second thought. Hannah served him as usual, her smile practiced but warm. Coffee, extra cream, and the day's special meatloaf tonight, right? She asked, her voice light despite the exhaustion in her eyes, her hand steady as she poured. Edward nodded, barely looking up from his phone, where he was reviewing case notes for a messy divorce case that had left him drained. Over the years, he'd come to appreciate her efficiency, the way she remembered his order, but he never thought much of her beyond that. To him, she was just a waitress, part of the diner's backdrop, her life a mystery he had no interest in unraveling. He'd seen her kind before, hard-working, invisible, stuck in a cycle he assumed they chose. One humid Friday afternoon, Edward was in a foul mood. A contentious divorce case had dragged on in his courtroom, the opposing counsel's incompetence testing his patience to its limits. He arrived at the Peach Blossom earlier than usual, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy with frustration. Hannah served him his coffee, her usual smile in place, but he barely acknowledged her, his mind still tangled in the day's arguments. As she refilled his mug, he noticed a legal textbook peeking out of her bag behind the counter. A worn copy of Black's Law Dictionary, its spine cracked from use. Curiosity piqued, mixed with irritation at the world. He made a comment, his tone dripping with condescension. Studying law, are we? Perhaps you could serve coffee and stay out of legal matters, dear. It's a bit more complicated than taking orders. Hannah froze, her hand tightening around the coffee pot until her knuckles whitened. The word stung, a sharp reminder of the world's low expectations, of the countless times she'd been dismissed as just something, just a waitress, just a kid from the wrong side of town, just a girl with no degree. She'd heard worse. Customers who snapped at her called her girl or worse. But this cut deeper, coming from a man whose world she longed to join, a man who held the power to shape justice. Her heart pounded, but she forced a smile, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. Just try to learn, sir. Never know when it might come in handy. She turned away, retreating to the kitchen, her hand shaking as she scribbled a note in her textbook, a mantra to herself. You're more than they see. You're more than they'll ever know. Edward didn't notice her reaction. Already back to his phone, his comment a throwaway jab born of a bad day. To him, it was nothing. A fleeting moment of irritation vented on someone he assumed wouldn't care. But for Hannah, it was a spark, igniting a fire that had been smoldering for years. She'd spent her life proving people wrong. Teachers who said she'd never amount to anything. Foster care workers who doubted she could raise Caleb. Customers who treated her like furniture. She wasn't about to let a judge's word stop her. That night, she stayed up late, her legal notes spread across the table, her resolve hardening. She'd show him and the world what she was capable of. The following week, a small legal matter landed in Judge Thomas's courtroom, a dispute between two local businesses, a bakery called Sweet Haven and a supplier, Green Valley Foods, over a breached contract for flour deliveries. It was a routine case, the kind Edward usually found tedious, with predictable arguments and sloppy lawyering. Hannah, by pure chance, was tangled in it. She'd been at Sweet Haven, picking up a discounted cake for Caleb's 17th birthday, when a heated argument between the bakery owner, Mrs. Clara Bennett, and the supplier's rep erupted in the back room. Hannah overheard details about their contract, dates, quantities, payment terms, that stuck in her mind thanks to her legal studies. When Mrs. Bennett, a Peach Blossom regular who knew Hannah's knack for details, learned she'd witnessed the argument, she begged her to testify, desperate for any edge in court. Hannah arrived at the Fulton County Courthouse, her stomach in knots, her hands clutching a thrift store navy dress that felt too thin for the imposing room. The courtroom was a world apart from the diner. High ceilings, polished wood, the air heavy with the weight of justice. She sat in the witness waiting area, her legal textbook tucked away, her mind racing to the contract law she'd studied. She hadn't expected to see Judge Thomas presiding, and when she did, her heart sank. His words, "just a waitress," echoed in her mind, a taunt that fueled her determination. She took a deep breath, whispering to herself, "You know this. You've got this." When she was called to the stand, Edward didn't recognize her at first. To him, she was just another witness, her face blending into the sea of people he saw daily. But as she began to testify, something shifted. Hannah spoke with a clarity that cut through the courtroom's stuffy air, her voice steady as she recounted the argument she'd overheard. She didn't just recite facts. She dissected them, pointing out inconsistencies in the supplier's claims with precision that made the opposing counsel, a young lawyer named Brian Holt with a flashy suit and a cocky grin, falter. The contract specified delivery by the 15th of each month, but the supplier's own invoice, dated the 20th, shows they missed the deadline, she said, her tone calm but firm, her eyes locked on the lawyer. She cited a clause from the Uniform Commercial Code, Section 2 to 207, explaining how the supplier's late delivery constituted a material breach, her words flowing like she'd been arguing cases for years. Edward leaned forward, his skepticism giving way to surprise. The courtroom was silent, the air charged with the weight of her words. Brian Holt tried to trip her up, firing rapid questions about contract law, assuming she'd crumble under pressure. But Hannah was ready. She countered his questions, catching a critical error in his interpretation of the contract's termination clause. If you look at Section 2 to 309, the notice of termination wasn't properly served, which voids the supplier's claim to damages, she said, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. She pointed out a discrepancy in the supplier's delivery records, a missing signature on a key receipt, that proved they'd knowingly breached the contract. The bakery's lawyer, Tom Reynolds, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of experience, shot her a look of awe, scribbling notes furiously. Even the bailiff, usually stoic, raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching in a rare smile. Hannah's testimony didn't just turn the case. It turned the room upside down. She didn't stop at the contract breach. She analyzed the supplier's financial records, which Mrs. Bennett had provided, and pointed out a pattern of overbilling that had gone unnoticed. The invoices show a 10% markup above the agreed rate, which violates the contract's pricing clause, she said, her voice steady, her reasoning airtight. Her analysis was so thorough that Tom Reynolds leaned over to Mrs. Bennett, whispering, "Where did you find her?" Brian Holt scrambled to recover, his confidence cracking, but Hannah's calm, razor-sharp responses left him floundering. She didn't flaunt her knowledge. She wielded it like a scalpel. Each word precise, each point undeniable. Edward was floored. His earlier mockery, just a waitress, echoed in his mind, now a bitter reminder of his prejudice. He'd seen countless lawyers in his courtroom, many with prestigious degrees from Emory or Georgia State, but few had displayed the raw intellect Hannah showed. She wasn't just reciting facts. She was reasoning through them, connecting dots with a clarity that rivaled his best days on the bench. When she stepped down from the stand, the courtroom buzzed, whispers rippling through the spectators. Lawyers, clerks, even the janitor who'd slipped in to watch. Tom Reynolds approached her, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Miss Mitchell, have you ever considered law school? You've got a gift, a damn rare one." Hannah's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "I've thought about it, Mr. Reynolds. Just never had the chance." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of sacrifice, of dreams deferred for Caleb's sake. Edward called a recess, retreating to his chambers, his mind racing. He'd misjudged her, dismissed her based on her job, her appearance, her place in a world he thought he understood. He thought of his son, Ryan, who'd accused him of being out of touch, of caring more about status than people. Hannah's performance was a wake-up call, a reminder that brilliance could hide in the most unexpected places. He sat at his desk, staring at a photo of Ryan, his heart heavy with regret. He'd been wrong about Hannah, and maybe about a lot of things. Back at the Peach Blossom, Hannah's life didn't change overnight, but the courtroom moment was a spark that refused to fade. Tom Reynolds became her advocate, meeting her after shifts to discuss her potential. He introduced her to Dr. Anita Carter, a law professor at Emory University, known for mentoring underrepresented students. Dr. Carter was impressed by Hannah's self-taught knowledge, her ability to dissect cases with an instinct most first-year students lacked. She invited Hannah to audit a contract law course, no strings attached. Hannah hesitated, her shifts, Caleb's needs, the endless bills. But Caleb overheard and pushed her. "You're always telling me to chase my dreams, Hannah," he said, his eyes fierce with pride. "You gotta chase yours too. I'll be okay." She enrolled, auditing classes while working nights at the diner. The first months were brutal. Late nights studying in the library, early mornings serving coffee to truckers who called her darling. Without looking up, her eyes burned with exhaustion, her hands shook from too much coffee, but she pushed through. Dr. Carter saw her potential, assigning her mock cases that she tackled with ferocity that stunned her classmates. She'd sit in the back. Her thrift store blazer contrasted her designer bags, but her arguments were sharper, her insights deeper. Caleb helped, quizzing her on legal terms over dinner, his pride in her a quiet fuel. He'd leave notes on her textbooks. "You're going to be a badass lawyer, sis." And she'd smile, her heart swelling. Edward, meanwhile, couldn't shake Hannah's performance. He returned to the Peach Blossom, this time with a different demeanor. When Hannah served his coffee, he looked her in the eye, his voice softer, almost hesitant. "I owe you an apology, Miss Mitchell. I was wrong about you. What you did in my courtroom. I've rarely seen anything like it. You have a gift." Hannah nodded, her smile cautious but genuine, her heart still guarded. "Thank you, Judge. I just said what I saw." Her words were simple, but they carried a quiet power, a reminder that she'd earned her place. He left a $20 tip, not out of pity, but respect, a small gesture to acknowledge her worth. He began reflecting on his own biases, his tendency to judge people by their titles or lack thereof. He reached out to Ryan, sending a long-overdue letter about his regrets as a father, admitting his failures, promising to do better. The letter was raw, unpolished, a far cry from his courtroom rulings, but it was honest. Hannah's journey into law wasn't smooth. The diner remained a grind, and Mr. Grayson, the manager, grew resentful of her new schedule. He cut her shifts, claiming she was distracted, leaving her scrambling to cover bills. One night, she overheard him bragging about skimming tips, a practice she'd suspected but never proved. Rage surged through her, but she channeled it into action. She confided in Rosa, a co-worker who'd seen Grayson scammed firsthand, her own eyes tired but fierce. Together, they gathered evidence, receipts, timestamps, witness statements, and presented it to Mrs. Ellison, the diner's owner, a quiet woman who rarely intervened but carried a sharp sense of justice. Mrs. Ellison fired Grayson, restoring Hannah's shifts and implementing a fair tip policy. The victory was small but seismic, a crack in the system that had kept Hannah down. Rose and the other waitresses, old Mrs. Jenkins, young Sarah with dreams of nursing school, rallied around her, calling her the one who fought back. It was a reminder that Hannah's voice could change things, even in a place as small as the Peach Blossom. At Emory, Hannah faced new challenges. Some classmates dismissed her as an outsider, whispering about her lack of degree, her diner job. A professor, Dr. Langston, was skeptical, grilling her in class to test her knowledge. But Hannah held her ground, her answers sharp, her reasoning flawless. Dr. Carter pulled her aside after one session, her voice warm. "You're not here to prove them wrong, Hannah. You're here to prove yourself right." The words became her mantra, a shield against doubt. 2 years later, Hannah stood in the Emory University Law Library, her first real case as a student attorney projected on a screen. She won a scholarship, thanks to Dr. Carter's recommendation and Tom's support, and was now a full-time law student. Her case, a pro bono defense for a low-income tenant facing eviction, was a triumph. Her arguments clear, her passion undeniable. She wove in stories of the tenant's family, kids who reminded her of Caleb, making the case about more than law. It was about justice. Caleb, now a freshman engineering student at Georgia Tech, cheered from the audience, his grin wide as he held up a sign. "Go, Lawyer Hannah." She'd moved into a small but cozy apartment closer to campus, the walls covered with Caleb's sketches and her legal notes. The faucet didn't drip anymore, and the fridge was stocked with fresh fruit, a small victory that felt monumental. She mentored younger students, especially those from backgrounds like hers, teaching them that dreams weren't bound by circumstance. But imposter syndrome lingered like a shadow. Late nights, she'd stare at her casebooks, fearing she'd never be enough. Then she'd see Caleb's sign on her desk, a reminder of why she kept going. Edward was changing too. Inspired by Hannah's story, he volunteered at a legal aid clinic, working with clients who reminded him of her, people the system overlooked. He reconnected with Ryan, their conversation slow but healing, his son's guarded trust a hard-won victory. He kept a photo of the peach blossom on his desk, a reminder of the day he'd been humbled. He began mentoring young lawyers, seeking out those with raw talent like Hannah, determined to open doors he'd once ignored. A new challenge emerged when Hannah was invited to speak at a national legal conference in Washington, D.C., a platform that could launch her career. The catch: she'd need to present a new case study, something bold and personal, in just 8 weeks. The pressure was immense, and doubt crept back, whispering that she wasn't ready for a stage that big. Caleb sensed her fear, slipping a drawing under her door, a superhero version of her, holding a gavel like a sword, with the words "You're my hero" scrawled in marker. It was the push she needed. Hannah poured herself into the project, creating a case study on tenant rights, weaving in stories of Atlanta's low-income families, her own included. The work was grueling, her nights a blur of research and self-doubt, but she pushed through, driven by the faces of the people she wanted to help. She included a section on the peach blossom, tying her journey to the broader fight for justice, making a love letter to her roots. Edward faced his own reckoning. Ryan agreed to visit during the conference, a chance to rebuild their bond. But his colleagues at the courthouse pressured him to distance himself from the legal aid clinic, calling it a distraction from his duties. He spent sleepless nights weighing his legacy, torn between the prestige of his title and the lives he wanted to change. Hannah's courage became his anchor. He decided to fight, preparing a proposal to fund legal aid programs through the court system, risking his reputation for a cause that felt right. 3 years later, Hannah stood on the stage at the D.C. conference, her heart pounding as she presented her tenant rights case study. The slides were powerful, data-driven arguments blended with stories of families she'd met, their struggles echoing her own. She spoke of the peach blossom, the judge who dismissed her the moment she proved him wrong. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger, each word a declaration of her strength. Caleb, now 20, clapped from the front row. His sign now a banner. Lawyer Hannah, changing the world. Dr. Carter and Tom Reynolds watched from the audience, their pride a quiet echo of her own. The audience gave a standing ovation, their applause washing over her like a wave. Edward approached after her speech, Ryan at his side, their bond stronger than it had been in years. "You've done more than prove me wrong, Hannah," Edward said, his voice thick with pride. "You've reminded me what justice is for." He pulled the crumpled $20 bill from his wallet, the tip from that night. "I kept this to remind me to see people, not just titles." Hannah laughed, tears in her eyes. "You're full of surprises, Judge." Ryan hugged her, his voice soft. "You're like the mom I wish I'd had. Thank you for showing the way." 5 years after that fateful day in the diner, Hannah stood in her own law office, a small space in Atlanta's heart, its walls lined with case files, Caleb's art, and her courtroom sketches. She was a rising star, representing clients the system often ignored, tenants, workers, dreamers like her. Her mentorship program had grown, helping dozens of kids from low-income backgrounds find their path. Caleb, now a junior at Georgia Tech, worked part-time at her firm, his engineering skills a complement to her legal work. Their home was a haven, filled with laughter, laughter and the bark of their dog, Max, a scruffy mutt they'd adopted. Edward retired from the bench, dedicating his time to legal aid and mentoring young lawyers. He and Ryan rebuilt their bond, their conversations filled with laughter and honesty. He visited Hannah's office, bringing coffee from the Peach Blossom, a nod to where it all began. "You changed me, Hannah," he said, his voice soft. "You showed me what I've forgotten." Hannah smiled, handing him a sketch she'd drawn. A courtroom where justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. "You saw me, Judge." That was enough. Under Atlanta's starry sky, Hannah and Caleb stood outside their office, the city's pulse a reminder of their journey. The Peach Blossom's neon sign still glowed, a beacon for dreamers. Hannah was no longer just a waitress. She was a force, her brilliance a light for others. The world had tried to dim her, but she'd won, not just for herself, but for every invisible soul who dared to dream. And in that flicker of neon, in the hum of a small-town diner, was a promise that hope could always find a way.